Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. I'm super excited for today's interview. I've got a beautiful yogini, Kristen Stuart, here to talk about her journey as a yoga teacher, as a yoga studio owner, and what she's doing now, which is teaching immersions or small trainings as well as leading retreats. And one of the things that I really love about talking to people for this podcast is finding people who have done really unique, cool things with their yoga career. And hopefully these people can teach all you listeners out there that there's so much more that you can do than just teach at studios. And obviously, if you want to teach at multiple studios and that's your goal or your dream or where you're at with your career, I think that's amazing as well. There's no right or wrong. But it's really cool to hear what other people are doing and see all the different things that you can do once you've got a yoga teacher training certificate. So Kristen and I cover quite a few different topics, and we sort of just jump right into the interview. So without further ado, here's Kristen. I feel like there's sort of this idolized idea of what it is to be a yoga teacher.
My gosh. You're so right. You're so right. You know?
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough. Actually, I just had this conversation because, of course, 2 days of the work I was doing with Elena was, you know, what she calls her art of attention teacher training enhancement.
Cool.
And so there were 50 of us in this space, all different levels. You know, some of us had been teaching for, 10 plus years, either owners of or had been owners of studios and all of that. And then there's these, the younger crew who are fresh out of teacher trainings within the last couple of years, wondering how do I make it? How do I do it? And, bottom line, you don't make a living as a yoga teacher teaching at yoga studios.
Yeah.
You don't. You'd need to teach 15, 18, 20 classes a month at, your average, say you make between $40, $50 a class, right?
Yeah.
Numbers. And you'll burn out. You'll stop practicing. It's not sustainable that way to make a successful living. And so, it's a rich conversation to be having. And I include a full day workshop on the business of yoga in my art of teaching, teacher training program, or mentorship program is really what it is.
Yeah. Because
the business piece is so, it's the missing piece for a lot of teachers and the misperceptions people have.
Totally. I completely agree. I feel like, I've talked to a few different people just about different things and talked to people who dove in teaching full time and just like what that life is like. Because people are like, yeah, cool, you get to teach yoga all day. And it's like I know for me, like 3 classes in a day is my max. Like,
sure.
And that's sure. Like, I need to go home and just be like quiet and still after that. Like, it's just so energetically consuming.
It is. And that's right. It's energy and people don't see that. And what people see is, they know what it feels like to be in a yoga class, how good it feels and the energy, and you're in a room community where you feel like you belong, you're with like-minded people. And that's all really rich, right? It feels very good experientially for an individual. And so, then there's an assumption made that the teacher gets to soak in that all of the time, and that's what their experience is, yet not recognizing the energy that is being held, moved, and shifted through, skilled yoga teachers in a space.
Yeah, definitely.
So much more than, let me guide your body into a warrior pose.
And it's even like as a student, you're like, oh, cool, we're moving through this like fluid sequence. And it's like, that doesn't just happen. Like somebody has to make the choice of getting you there and cueing you so that your body moves in that way. And then they have to do it all over on the other side. And there's so much that goes through your head when you're teaching.
For sure. There's a lot going on. You're managing multiple levels of, multiple environments almost. Your physical studio space. Okay. If you're using music, lighting, oh my gosh, the heat, all of these very practical pieces to create a space of comfort for people.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then there's the movement piece or the meditation piece or pranayama that's being guided. And in that process, the deeper subtle body layers are being affected in each student. So each student is going through their own internal process, which is bringing up energy in the form of emotion or thought. And that's filling the room. Mm-hmm. And, to be in a space where the teacher is able to successfully manage and shift that energy, that's what I see as such skill in a yoga teacher.
Yeah. It's definitely not an easy thing.
No.
It's not as easy as warrior 1, warrior 2, reverse warrior.
Exhale.
Vinyasa.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's rich work. I love the work, and it's an honor to be a student in a space. Really, as a teacher, it's being a student and observing what works, what doesn't work, and facilitating very beautiful relationships with people.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. That's a really good way to put it, as in like you're learning from your students.
Always. Eyes wide open, eyes wide open. What's going on in the space?
Yeah, that's cool. That's not always an easy thing, especially as somebody who's recently started teaching. It's hard to remember what you want to cue and sequencing and watching people's bodies and then trying to take things away from your students as well. Yeah.
Or not take, but listen, listen and you get the takeaways, what you learned or what you saw, which is the real, I'd say, richness in enhancing your skills as a teacher.
Yeah.
Is, to go into this space, ready to learn as you teach.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about that. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
When did you first start practicing yoga?
I started practicing in 2001, which is when I first moved to Canmore. I was introduced to the practice of Ashtanga. And, right away. So at the time, I was working as a hiking guide and personal trainer.
So yoga was a nice way to complement that?
It was. Yeah, it was. And by my second class, I distinctly remember being on my mat thinking, this is what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. This is what I'm going to teach.
That's so cool. I love that. And so did you practice for a while before you dove into getting a training or becoming a teacher, or?
I practiced for about 2 years and then, went into, took my first teacher training program with, at the time it was called Trinity Yoga. And now the affiliation is a company called Gayatri Yoga with Ali Bogard.
Okay. Yeah. I've heard of that before.
Yeah.
And then did you start teaching right away?
I was personal training at the time still. And so I was, I started offering some classes out of the space where I was personal training. And a lot of my personal training clients, they're great students. They said, well, this is what Kristen is into now, or she's loving. So it must work. So let's do that. So it was a really sweet, process of clientele shifting from personal training and coming into my yoga classes as well, which was great.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's awesome that you had that clientele built up to the point where they have that trust for you. Like, if she's doing this thing, it must be awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There are a few people that are like, oh, I can't do yoga. I'm too tight. Which we hear that all the time. And the analogy that everyone makes, well, that's like saying your teeth are too dirty to brush them.
Yeah, totally. It's
right?
funny because people would never say that about their teeth, right? Like the obvious solution if your teeth feel gross is to go brush them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like,
The body feels tight. Let's open it up.
yeah, let's stretch it a little bit. Let's move.
Exactly.
It's funny the way the human brain works, the way our thought processes work like that.
Mm-hmm. We always know it's the medicine that serves us the most is the one we tend to resist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And then, so you were teaching out of a personal training space for a while. And then did you move into studio spaces soon after that? Or where did your teaching go from there?
Wow. It's funny. I need to review my timeline. I was offering classes out of personal training space and then renting some public space, it was this conference room in a hotel here in Canmore.
Cool.
My personal training client, she managed there. So she said, here, why don't you use this space? And it was great. And I, had all the props and I had this crew that would show up a couple times a week for these classes. And you started to see that building, which was fantastic. I did a little bit of teaching out of studio, nothing consistent though at the time. There wasn't a lot of space for more teachers. And then in 2011 made the decision that I was going to open my own studio.
Cool.
Yeah. And so started to work towards doing that.
Was that something that as soon as you got your teacher training was like a dream that you had? Like at some point I want to have my own studio, or was it something that progressed slowly?
It wasn't right away that I knew that. It was over time, over probably a few years where I started to see, and feel that, yes, I do want to open a space. That is a dream.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then, I hear a ton of yoga teachers, especially new yoga teachers, who are like, yeah, I want to open a yoga studio. It seems like the obvious thing to do with my career. And it's another point where I'm like, do you want to be a business owner? Because it's a business.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious what that experience was like for you, like opening this business in a small mountain town that obviously had an interest in yoga.
Mm-hmm. I love the creative process. That's what I feel very drawn to. And so creating and opening the space, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of creativity flowing. It was well received in the community, offering something a little different, and yeah. And then I started to see how much energy was required to manage all the different pieces, moving parts that needed, to be paid attention to.
Yeah.
And so, I wound up, within 7 months, I wound up having to close the studio because I literally burnt myself out.
Yeah.
Just teaching too much, financial stress, managing and mentoring a team of teachers in the space. It was all, I took on too much. Mm-hmm. And right to the point where, my health became compromised.
Yeah. I feel like that's, it's something that you hear about a lot in like the business world, like people who start businesses and then they're like, wow, I didn't realize like everything that I had to do and how much it affects, your personal health. And obviously being in like the yoga side of things, you become really aware of your body. And I feel like when you're really in touch with your body, you instantly know when something's off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But for me, I wasn't listening. I wasn't being a good student to myself, truly. Okay. I wasn't listening to the signs and the signals of, feeling just this constant buzz of energy, which was really anxiety, as far as thinking about, heading into the summer season where, the studio tends to become quiet. And so, within this first year, I didn't have a lot of backup plan.
Yeah.
Place.
Yeah. Was it to the point where you're like, you lie down to sleep at night and your head just like doesn't quiet ever, and then you can't really get any rest, and then you wake up and do it all over?
That was a big piece of it. there's a point where I literally wasn't sleeping it was about a month.
Wow.
Where I was catching maybe a couple hours of sleep a night. And what happens when the body doesn't sleep is it doesn't heal. It's not rested. And, there's no possible way of being in clear grounded space when, the body hasn't had the opportunity to heal through sleep.
Yeah, definitely. Sleep is so important. I love sleep.
Yes, sleep is my best friend. I love my days now. It's an 8 or 9 hours sleep every night.
Totally. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm sleeping too much, but then I'm like, no, my body will tell me.
It does for sure.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest things that you learned out of that experience opening that studio? One of the biggest ones was asking for help. Yeah.
Asking for help, and there's so many people that want to help. And I wasn't seeking that. I didn't ask for mentorship or, start communicating about what I was feeling and the concerns I had. I didn't have a circle of, people that I was sharing that with. So I was holding a lot of it inside and figuring I need to figure this out. Mm-hmm. This is it's my business. It's my responsibility. And so I wasn't letting myself be vulnerable in sharing my concerns and my fears and seeking that outside, through different peer circles and mentorship circles. Outside coaching would have been so helpful for me.
Yeah. Do you think even having, like a staff of people or like a studio manager, accountant, those sorts of things to kind of help you out?
You know what? I did have those pieces in place for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Those pieces were in place. I think it's more, being able to meet on a relative regular basis with someone who knows business and really diving into strategy and, talking about solutions, and because there's basic concepts. It doesn't matter what business you're in. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of business concepts that it's applicable across the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Marketing, I feel like, is a huge thing that's it's like under, I don't know if underrated is the right word, but people don't put the importance on it that I think it needs.
See, and I feel like I did a good job with that. I found that was a strength of mine. The marketing, the creation of programming and, getting the word out and working with professionals in that way with great branding and professional presentation so that the branding and the message that I wanted to be out there, it was happening. And one of the best pieces of feedback I would get that would affirm that piece for me was when people would say, I see you everywhere. And what they mean by that is they've seen the branding popping up in various places, creating this consistent message. And so it's always in their mind. Oh, right. Sacred roots.
Yeah. Cool. I love that. Do you think it's important then if you're opening a business, to really look at where your strengths and weaknesses lie? So for you really loved the creative part of it, and you're like, yes, I know how to talk to people. I know how to get this out there. And then seeking help for the things that maybe you're more uncertain about.
Definitely. Yeah. Outsource those pieces that are not your strength, because the amount of energy that goes into there's only so much energy available. And if you're fumbling and struggling while at the same time, resenting the certain aspects of the business that are not your strength, all it's doing is taking away precious resources, from what you are good at and what you need to be focusing yourself on.
Yeah, definitely.
As soon as you create that space by delegating and moving some of that load off of your shoulders, that helps create, a greater flow for the creative and for you to show up fully for for a yoga studio to show up fully for your students and your teachers that are working with you.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. What was the process of actually getting teachers?
There's so many yoga teachers in this Bow Valley that it's not a problem. It's not a problem. For me, it's everyone. I experience their teaching and get a sense of where they were at with their teaching, what their passion is as a teacher, as well as I want to hear from them what their strengths are and what their intentions are for teaching.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes I forget about how many yoga teachers there are in Canmore and Banff. And even Cochrane. For small communities, we've got a lot of yoga teachers. Yeah.
Ready. Yes.
Yeah, it's like that valley just attracts people who are interested in yoga and who teach yoga. It's kind of funny.
Sure. Well, there's, and this is another conversation I had recently was on the amount of teacher training programs that are out there. There are 10, 15 years ago, there were not nearly the amount of yoga teachers or teachers then offering yoga teacher training programs that there are now.
Yeah.
And what that's doing is it's creating a lot of yoga teachers. And a business coach I worked with, she said, why would you put a yoga teacher training program out there when all you're doing is creating competition? You're training competition for yourself. And it was an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
It was an interesting perspective.
That is an interesting perspective to think about. I was actually talking to somebody the other day who told me that there's about 13,000 new yoga teachers coming out in the United States, if not North America, in a year. And I was like, damn, that is a lot of new yoga teachers.
It is.
But then really it comes from, on the business side of things, to be really profitable, running and to get your studio to grow, running teacher trainings is a huge opportunity.
It is.
And so from that business side, it makes sense that you would start a teacher training, that you grow in that direction with your business, but then you're pumping out more yoga teachers. And it's this toss up. I know everybody doesn't want to teach. And I mean, I felt like my teacher training was so powerful for me personally with personal growth, is that there's a part of me that really thinks that everyone should do a yoga teacher training, even if they don't want to ever teach yoga.
Yes. Yeah. It's a great program. All of your fears, your insecurities, your doubts, they all come right to the surface because you're standing up there in front of people and, you're being vulnerable. Right.
Yeah, definitely.
And it is rich work, and so many people do the teacher training programs more as a personal development program without the intention to teach. And on that note, that's part of the reason I created the Yogini Path program. Yeah, which is an immersion in the teachings of philosophy of yoga without the teaching component. So those that want to dive deeper, this is an opportunity to do so. And really the dive deeper is into Svadhyaya, into self-study.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea of having something that's, it's very about that inner journey and that they don't necessarily have to have any interest in teaching. Like they can if they want to, but they don't have to.
For sure.
Yeah. I was talking to, somebody who taught at the Vancouver School of Yoga, and that's an interesting program because theirs is actually very directed for people who do want to teach. Right. The whole program is we teach you how to be a good yoga teacher. And it's not so much about that inner journey. And I kind of like the idea how trainings can differentiate themselves in that way. How it's like, we're here to help you be a really good yoga teacher. Maybe you don't want to teach yoga. Maybe you do. Come here. That's sort of a cool option that's kind of arising.
Yeah. And I think teachers are being asked to step up and differentiate their offerings. One of the questions that often comes up is, how do I pick what teacher training to do? Where do I go? And really, it's all about relationship. If you resonate with a particular teacher, then, and it may not be forever. It may be for this current time that you are in. The teachings are resonating, you feel them deeply, and there's a connection there.
Yeah.
feels expansive for you, then, that's a great sign that that's a good person to study with.
Yeah, definitely. I really like that advice because I know that's something that I struggled with. I knew I wanted to go away, but I was like, I don't know where I want to go. And there's so many to choose from. And a lot of people I talk to for this podcast are like, yeah, I only had 1 or 2 choices internationally. And I'm like,
right.
I had like 1 or 2,000 choices.
Right. Yeah. And intuition is a great guide in that regard. Is really sitting with it and feeling into, does this feel right? Does this feel good? Mm-hmm. And going with that, going with gut instinct. It's usually right.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think I was really searching for an answer and I wanted somebody to kind of like tell me what was going to be right. I know my boyfriend is really big on, he will not, if I'm struggling with something, he will not give me an answer just to like pacify me. He's like, no, you got to figure this out on your own. And that's eventually there's a few different ones that I kind of sat with and thought about, and one that I kept coming back to. And finally I was like, I'm just going to book this.
Yeah. Perfect. That's great. It's good listening. You know, good listening. Yeah.
It's not always easy though.
No, it's not. We want yes or no, this or that, right? Full clarity. And that process in and of itself teaches us to listen to ourselves, that we have the answers internally, and to pay attention. And, I feel yoga, and particularly my meditation practice, has been such a valuable and powerful teacher in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that for sure. Yeah, there's nothing like, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say honing intuition and honing that sense of knowing internally.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's really interesting when you're just sitting silently, even if you're just in Shavasana, how all of a sudden your mind sort of is like telling you things. And if you're just in touch with that, it's really cool.
Yeah. And the practice clears the space to listen, clears the space so we're not distracted by discomfort or stress. It's this constant cleaning and clearing, mind and body. Every breath we're removing stress, toxicity, and the body rinses it out so that we can be clear and full with our organs functioning, our chemicals moving properly through this incredible vessel.
Yeah. That's such a beautiful way to put that. I love that. So for you, what was the healing process like from your studio? So you were run down, burnt out. You're like, I have to close this. And then what was next for you?
You know what? It took me a while to get my health back. It was actually almost a year before I felt like I had my energetic capacity back, healing my adrenal glands. So it felt slow, but when I look back, I realized that actually it was a pretty quick process. Grateful for the knowledge and the exposure to, wellness practices, that I had to help me, get healthy quickly, really. My journey was a lot of meditation, because I actually didn't even have the physical strength to do an asana practice for about 3 months.
Wow.
So I was sitting and listening, and working, strengthening that practice for me. And that's when I really connected to daily meditation practice. Before that, it was in and out in my personal practice. But suddenly I was forced to sit. I couldn't do much else. And that's now a non-negotiable. That's daily morning ritual. It's morning lemon water, meditation. I call them my morning meds, then a double Americano, and then an but yeah, so over the course of what really was almost a year, it was a slow rebuild, because I had to rebuild my energetic body, my organ function, my health, and to feel energy move through me once again. Yeah,
that's a crazy process.
So I had to figure it out. I remember thinking, okay, I got to create a prescription for myself. That was, So yeah, it was a tough, that was we'll call it the dark night of the soul experience for myself. It was a tough place. I lost what was my dream, and that's how I felt. And so there was a grieving period with that of, getting over losing the studio and then realizing, wow, how did I wind up in this place and how do I get myself out of it? And creating what I called a prescription, which ultimately was towards radical self-love.
Cool. Yeah.
So beneath all of it was, how did I wind up here? And recognizing that I had not consciously connected and embodied true self-love. That there was always this, this feeling of needing to be more and do more so that internally, the acceptance wasn't there. And the feedback, that I had from the studio, everyone's like, this is amazing. My life is changing. This is so awesome. And it's all this positive affirmation, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I realized that that's where a lot of my affirmation came from, is outside sources through the work I was doing, it's good work. Yet, that was helping me, feel that sense of purpose, but I hadn't fully connected internally to my own source of affirmation, of fulfillment.
Wow. That's pretty incredible.
And so that was the big piece. That was the jewel out of it all. And out of that was, born a lot of the programs that I'm offering now, which are a little different than typical like a teacher training program. And, my coaching practice really expanded out of that.
Yeah.
It's really now it's meeting people wherever they're at on the spectrum who are going through different transitions in life. Cause generally when these little, I call them smacks from the universe come, they can be taps and smacks. And then eventually, if you're not listening, a 2x4 that wipes you out totally. But there's signs, they're messages. Yeah. That, there's the soul is speaking and it wants to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. To take the time to listen to really what's coming up. And it was amazing when I look back at all of it and think it wasn't so long ago. And I look at where I am now and the work that I'm doing, which feels so much richer than it ever would have been. And, how things have evolved, both for me in my teaching and, in what people are ready to now receive. It's very rich. It's so exciting right now to be doing this work.
Yeah. It's kind of cool to see or to hear that something so amazing came out of a really bad time in your life. Like you hit a low and it's you just don't know how things can get better. I feel like It's like you hit that point and you're like, I just don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Yeah. Did you feel really frustrated in that period of time?
Oh, it was a really dark time for me for sure, and, it was really hard to move through, it was the anxiety, then the depression, to give it terms, where I felt, like I had completely failed. I felt I'd failed my community. I let them down. I let down the teachers who were working for me. That responsibility as a studio owner is really, it's full on, mm-hmm. feeling I'm responsible for these other people's livelihoods in a way.
Yeah.
And so I went through a lot of guilt. I went through a long period of guilt and, beating myself up big time.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't serve. I at the time I was just in it and that's all that was circulating through my mind. And then, moving through that and the journey of moving through that was the rich part of it. As ugly as it felt at the time.
Yeah.
That's where the real work began for me. And that was my journey to go through.
Wow. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to hear that through all of that, as, awful as it was, you were able to heal yourself in a really natural way, physically, as well as emotionally and mentally.
Yeah. And it's powerful. Really what it showed me, the practices work. Mm-hmm. The practices hypnosis work, meditation, so powerful in being able to reprogram the brain from a place of sliding into these grooves, the grooves or the samskaras of doubt, of, negative self-talk, and reprogramming, literally, so that the inner dialogue that is occurring is one of affirmation. It's one that holds the energy of expansiveness, of light, of love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's a good way to think about that.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anyone out there who's like thinking that they might want to open a yoga studio, but they're not quite certain about it, or they're kind of struggling with the decision, is there any pieces of advice you would give for them?
I would say, one, get really clear on why you want to open a yoga studio. What is your reasoning behind it? Is it simply to give yourself employment or really, because that is something that happens for sure.
Yeah.
Or, what is your intention with it, and talk to as many people as possible, get their perspective in all sorts of business. Do your research, research your markets and see what are the possibilities? What are your options? What do you want your career to look like? Because, inevitably when you've got your own space, you are limited. You can't be ticking off all the time. And, there's a lot of things to think about with that. So do your research, get very clear, and have as many conversations as you can with people who are both studio owners. Most people want to share. They want to share insight and information to support one another.
Yeah.
There's respecting, business boundaries, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're thinking about opening a studio, get clear on the why and the what, and not just in the immediate, 1, 2, 3 years vision, 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
And also, what do you want your life to look like?
Yeah, I think that's an important one.
Yeah. What do you want your life to look like? What do you see as your daily routine? That's all important.
Yeah.
So that you can be as informed and clear as possible.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's really important, is understanding kind of what you want out of your life and how you're going to get there. And if a yoga studio is actually what's going to do it for you, or maybe even being a yoga teacher.
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, what do you want? And what do you want your life to look like? Where you're living, and all of the factors that, come into that. Yeah,
definitely. Out of your healing process, was there any part of you that ever considered going back into owning a yoga studio, or were you very complete with that by the time?
No, it's always in the back of my mind.
Cool.
It truly is. Yeah. It's in the back of my mind. I think about it. And then I think about, wow, this year I've been able to travel a lot, run, to really fantastic retreats, one in Mexico, one in Peru. And these are annual offerings that I have, and then spend some time traveling, in New Zealand, which was great this year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, always looking and thinking about it, but it has always been in the back of my mind. Would I do it again?
Yeah.
Would I do it again?
Yeah, I was just curious. I feel like I'm very when something doesn't necessarily, I don't like using the word failure, because I feel like when you pursue a dream and it maybe doesn't work out, it's not necessarily a failure. It's, just didn't happen in that moment. But it's you learn so much from these things. You hit the bottom, you learn, you come back up. And it's if I could do it again, I'd do it differently. Maybe I should do it again.
I would do so many things differently. If I was to do it again, I would do so many things differently.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's these times that will, of challenges that can feel pretty heavy and low, in our lives. They're learning opportunities. It's your growth spurt. That's what I see it as. It's a growth spurt, and you're really being asked to rise up into your highest potential and your highest offering.
Yeah, definitely. When did you first start leading retreats?
My first retreat I did pretty early on. When I think about it, it makes me laugh thinking back to, it was a retreat. I held it out at a place called Spirit Ridge in Osoyoos. It was a really beautiful space. And it was in partnership with the resort property.
Okay.
Because they were part of a conglomerate and they had a couple here in Canmore. And so did a yoga retreat out there, which, it was a smaller group of women that came, had a ton of fun. But I knew early on that, a part of my business I wanted to be retreat work.
Okay, cool.
I enjoy and I see just how powerful it is to spend, a week immersed in study supported by, beautiful, nourishing, clean food, in a gorgeous environment to dive deeply into personal practice and study.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
What sort of things have you learned through running retreats over the years?
I would say you have to be okay with taking risk. Because typically when you make a reservation at a retreat center, you put down a non-refundable deposit.
Yeah.
and you're in a contract that you're committing to filling a certain amount of space. And there's always a question of what if it doesn't, right? And, nobody wants to lose money. But I remember one of the first retreats I ran in Mexico. It was actually the year that I had opened the studio, and I ran this retreat out of, outside of Sayulita, which is where I return year after year now. But my first retreat, it was really small. There was only 5 people. And I remember thinking, wow, well, we're going to go for it. And the retreat center was super accommodating and supportive, which was fantastic, and worked with me so that it did work. And I think, you need to think about all of the pieces of it. There's a lot of factors involved in, from making that commitment, taking that risk, putting the money down, committing to the space, and getting your marketing out there.
Yeah. And,
taking into consideration all the administration that goes into setting up a retreat. It's not I arrive and I'm in paradise teaching yoga for 7 days. I think there's a little illusion with that and misperception in a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree.
There's a lot that goes into it, and to hold space for people for a week, it's a lot. It's a lot of energy on your part, and so you need to feel ready to do that. But I love it. For me, it's worked out really well, and I feel drawn to certain destinations, and am quite particular in the spaces that I utilize for my retreats.
Yeah.
I want them to hold a certain energy to facilitate the experience and the healing that will occur.
How do you go about finding the right space? Is it just on your travels, encountering it, or through Google searches, or?
A lot of it, I pay attention to word of mouth quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So reaching out to people who I see have run retreats at different spaces, reaching out to them, what was the space like? How were they to work with? How did it feel? Getting feedback from other people who've been there. Sometimes I don't have that luxury. So it's been a little bit of research. Something catches my eye and I'll look into it more. And again, it's intuition saying, hey, pay attention to that. Let's look into this and see what it's all about. And the 2 destinations, the spaces I use currently, the one, Haramara retreat in Sayulita, and Huacutica in the Sacred Valley of Peru, they work really well for me. I love the space. I love, everything about my experience there over the last several years. So they're part of what keeps me going back year after year.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love what you said about how, they're right for me. and knowing that there's no like right or wrong answer. It's about what feels good for you as the facilitator and how you can like hold the space for the people that are there in a space that feels good for you.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's personal. You know, we have different, we're drawn to different places, and it's a personal feeling. What sort of space do you want to hold? And then also, who are your clientele? Who is your program targeting? Mm-hmm. Higher end spaces mean higher end prices, which, you know, that will shift who your target market is.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a good point.
You also need to know that for yourself. And then as a Canadian, paying attention to the reality of the strength of the US dollar.
Yeah. It's a very real thing at the moment.
It's very real. And it's, you know, you're paying in US dollars to the retreat center. So you need to factor in all of those pieces, even when you're setting your pricing potentially a year in advance.
Wow. And that's even like into Peru and Mexico. They use the US dollar for stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's something that I wouldn't have considered.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Yeah, and so I learned that, you know, last year is setting prices a year in advance, and then, oh my gosh, look at how strong the US dollar is. And then watching, whoa, that's my profit margin shrinking and shrinking and shrinking the stronger the US dollar got, because I was charging in Canadian dollars.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to be reminded of if you're coming from a different country, particularly Canada. Mm-hmm. And in terms of making your plans for the retreat, do you plan sort of the days out so that they're pretty like packed, or do you plan that like time where people are going to have time to rest or to journal or to meditate on their own? Yeah,
people always, generally for a retreat program that doesn't have a teacher training component to it, you know, the typical program is a morning practice, morning meditation, morning practice. Daytime is, you know, the middle of the day is free for people to do whatever it is that they would like to, whether it's rest, journal, explore, do activities, and then afternoon practice. And then, you know, either evening time in, you know, discussion on Dharma talks or free time. So I plan it out what the week looks like and add in a few extra pieces, but the general structure is, you know, 2 practices a day.
Cool. And then if people get like meals included, or is that just sort of depending on retreat styles?
Usually all meals are included, or at least breakfast and dinner, because often people don't want to have to come back to the space for lunch. Yeah. You know, if you're planning on being out for the day. So, but yeah, for the most part, when you're booking with a retreat center, it's a one package price per person based on 2 to 3 meals a day in accommodation.
Cool. That's awesome to know. Mm-hmm. And then after your studio is when you started developing your, I don't know is trainings the word that you use for them, or?
Yep, they are, you know, immersions, trainings, study programs, for sure. They all apply.
And those are sort of born out of everything you learned from owning a yoga studio?
And personal experience, you know, both experience and study and what I've been learning along the way, you know, constantly evolving. I'm constantly evolving. And so is my teaching, and to continue to study is one of the most important pieces, I think, that, people need to remember, teachers need to remember is to keep studying and to keep developing yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like I was saying right at the beginning. It's a 200-hour just really doesn't cut it. It's like you're skimming the surface.
Little appetizer. Yeah. It's like an appetizer, and it draws you in. You're drawn in, and you think, oh wow, okay, here we go, and then it gets richer and fuller.
Yeah,
that's the path.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That resonates with me for sure. It's interesting because I feel like in a lot of ways people are like, cool, I've got this, 200-hour teacher training. Like I'm ready to go as a teacher. And I mean, everyone's not like that. But I think that it's really important to be constantly growing, be constantly learning, be constantly curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Curiosity is so rich. Be an explorer, you know, and that's what keeps us, revitalized, refreshed, you know, fresh information, apply it, experience it, and then weave it in to your offerings if it's resonating for you.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Generally we're drawn to certain places or certain teachers and trainings for a reason, right? It's paying attention to what's speaking to you now. Because what speaks to me now is very different from what was speaking to me 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Even years ago.
Yeah, it's something interesting that a teacher that I really like down in Atlanta said to me when I was chatting with her. She's like, I used to take a lot of offense to, you know, somebody came to the class and maybe they left or maybe they never came back again. She's like, and then I just realized that I'm not the teacher that they need in this moment.
And it's always shifting. Never take it personally.
Yeah.
And in fact, encourage people to try different offerings and work with the one that feels right in this moment.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes something that, you know, a teacher can say, or maybe it doesn't sit with that person right in that moment, but maybe they'll come back to it a few years later and it'll just all of a sudden click with them. Or you just never know. Life is kind of strange like that. And it's also one of the things that I really like about life. It just works in these weird ways.
Yeah, there's a constant growth going on. And that's not saying that, you know, you need to change. It's about literally peeling back the layers to access what is your truth beneath the surface. And that is what these practices do. This path of study and this path of practice, it's sweeping away the layers. You know, I love Amy Politi. She uses the analogy of the swiffering, you know, away the debris or the dust that is covering. And, you know, where every practice is removing another layer.
Yeah.
I love that. Access our true light, our true nature as light beneath the surface.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's such a great way to think about it. And so do you think if somebody is curious about developing their own immersions or teacher trainings or offerings, that they just need to kind of wait until it feels right for them? Or what's the process of actually starting to develop those?
Well, you start to, I think, pay attention to what interests you. Is it more on a physical, anatomical level? Is it more on an energetic? Is it more meditation focused? You know, what is working for you, and what do you want to share? You start to think about what do you want to share? What is flowing and really calling to you to speak about, to share, to explore and research even more. And keep a journal at hand and write random, these thoughts or these inspirations come up, put them in a book somewhere to collect your thoughts, because that's often what turns into what will be your next, workshop or, perhaps theme for a retreat, or theme for your class.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I know, an app that I have on my phone is called Evernote, and you can make like notebooks with a bunch of notes in them, and you can send them to people if you want to share them with. Cause I know for me, I struggled with the idea of carrying a notebook around just cause I don't often have a lot of stuff. And then I was like, I've got this device that does everything for me. Yeah. Why would I not take advantage of it?
Yeah. My notes pages in my iPhone are full.
Yeah.
Random thoughts that I then wind up weaving together, and I realize, oh, here we go. This is my next inspiration.
Yeah.
And to help keep things fresh. And a lot of teachers ask, well, how do I'm feeling stagnant in my teaching. How do I get fresh content.
Yeah.
And read, explore. Your next idea might come from a lyric in a song. It may come from the words of a child.
Yeah.
There's sources of inspiration everywhere, and that's where, it's important to be eyes wide open, paying attention to your environment, to the synchronicities of what feels like you're being guided. There's this natural flow that feels very expansive to you.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
a good sign.
Yeah, I love that, what you said about, lyrics of a song or, the words of a child. I find that sometimes my best thoughts are I'm walking and I'm just listening to music and it's like a walking meditation almost, but I'm kind of just letting my mind go. And then that's where having my phone there when all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I should write this down, like good blog post idea or, an idea I should explore for something further. That would be a cool theme for a yoga class.
Right. Yes. That's the best. For sure.
Yeah, it's interesting once you start getting into that flow. It happens so much more once you start it. Once you start connecting with, I should write this idea down. I should, do something with it. Then all of a sudden you're finding them everywhere.
Right. You're paying attention to the messages, right? And it feels very organic and really sweet. It has a sweet quality to it.
Yeah.
There's not a frustration or a forcing at all. It's organic. And then suddenly you realize, there's certain books that, literally are, that book fell off the shelf in front of, I'm going to take a look at what that's all about. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Inspiration is everywhere. It's being present enough to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, that's perfect way to describe it.
Cultivating presence. To pay attention to, great messages, great synchronicities coming through.
Yeah, definitely. That's spectacular. Is there any business lessons that you would give to anyone who's new into the yoga industry? Somebody who's just kind of stepping out of teacher training, knows they want to teach, anything that you would really recommend for them?
I think to seek out mentorship is a big one. When I first started teaching, I remember thinking, wow, I wish I had someone to go to ask advice or to, again, help me with some of these decisions or questions I have, very practical from, what do I charge to, how do I set up, going about doing privates. I do a lot of private yoga work as well. That's a part of my business. Mm-hmm. So seek mentorship, ask questions, and don't be shy.
Yeah.
Don't be shy with that. And look at people who are doing things that you feel inspired by. Talk to them. Mm-hmm. Look at and build your networks. Build your networks. Attend events, talk to people, and share your passion. Share what you're passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's all amazing advice. I love the idea of like attending events. Like you can just learn so much even as a practitioner if you go to something like a Wanderlust event or even like the Banff Yoga Festival. Mm-hmm. And I know Yoga Journal runs so many yoga events as well.
Yeah, and also events in your community, because it's connecting you to community and people who are interested, in yoga or meditation or crystal bowls or, attending these events and get to know who your community is and what people are looking for, what people are wanting, mm-hmm. because that is also a great, source of information and research as to, what, I think I want to offer a sound bath event with, a colleague in my community.
Yeah.
So, and I also go to business events and I listen to speakers, watch TED Talks. And that's also a way of enhancing your own skills, is looking at great speakers. They don't necessarily need to be speaking about yoga or teaching yoga, but what makes a great facilitator, a great speaker?
Yeah.
What are their tips and tools? What do you notice? So, really creating a wide lens of exposure for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. That's fabulous advice. I know, like, the speaking portion of being a yoga teacher is so huge. You're up there talking the entire time.
I run a whole module on voice and cueing, right?
Yeah. I did a weekend restorative teacher training, and she said one of the biggest things, she's like, your voice, it's huge when people are trying to relax.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And voice is your expression of who you are. Mm-hmm. Your voice is yourself, an expression of yourself.
Yeah, definitely. It's also cyclical. Hey, it always comes back. It's always time back.
Yes.
Awesome. I want to be mindful of your time, but do you have time for one more question?
You bet, for sure.
Awesome. So something that I've been asking most of the people who have been coming on the podcast is, if you could go back to when you first started teaching yoga and knowing everything that you know now, what is one piece of advice that you would give yourself then? I was going to say little Kristen.
Little Kristen. Don't be afraid to be yourself.
Cool. That's beautiful.
Teach what resonates for you.
Yeah. Like sort of the idea of teaching more from your heart than teaching from what everyone else is doing and what you might feel like is expected.
Exactly. Yeah. Teach what resonates for you, because there's an authenticity to that holds an energy that will automatically connect your students to you.
Cool.
So that authentic, that true, vulnerable self, sharing from that place is so rich. And teaching yoga is all about creating a nurturing relationship and connection. And when you speak from this place of truth, of what's moving through you right now, those are the richest classes, the richest teachings to share.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That resonates with me for sure. Amazing. Is there anything else that you want to share with anyone out there?
Enjoy the process. Enjoy it, and ask questions, seek mentorship, and, really nurture your community. It's so important. It's so important that we hold one another high. Mm-hmm. Because the higher we hold one another, people rise to that.
Yeah.
So hold your students to their highest potential, hold your fellow teachers, and ultimately hold yourself. You're ready for it.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I think that's all like resonating with me quite a bit. So I think that listeners will definitely be able to resonate with that as well.
Wonderful.
Awesome. And where should people go if they want to find out more about you?
So I do have a website, www.kristenstuart.ca, Stuart. My Facebook page, Kristen Stuart Yoga and Lifestyle, talks about my upcoming offerings, programs, workshops, as well as little inspirations. And I do have an Instagram feed, Kristen Stuart Yoga, as well, where I share a lot of what's moving through me, what's inspiring me, what my thoughts are, meditations, food inspiration, all sorts of goodness that support me on my path.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'll put links to all of that, just as I feel like, being that Kristen Stewart's also a famous actress.
I know.
Spelled differently. I'm sure that people have.
Unfortunately, she has a lot of the names and domains of both spellings, even though her name is spelled differently than me.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh, that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. So it's tricky. I couldn't get the .com. I had to get the .ca, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And,
totally
yeah, but it was funny. I did run into that and I thought, maybe I should give her a call.
It's probably her publicity or her publicist is like, we're just going to buy all these so nobody can create something crazy.
just in case.
You're like, that's my name, actually. I'd like to create a website for myself.
Yes, I want that back.
Awesome. Well, I'll put links for that on the show notes so that people can find those easily as well, and we don't end up on the wrong website.
Great. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'll be at the Banff Yoga Festival at the end of the month and out Winnipeg way in September for Prairie Love Festival, which will be another great time too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kristen.
All right. Thanks, Amanda.
So there's the interview with Kristen Stuart for you. Hopefully you've all learned lots about owning a yoga studio, developing retreats and your own teacher trainings, and just sort of what life as a yoga teacher is like. And to learn more, visit the website www.mbomyoga.com. I'll have links for Kristen's website there for the Banff Yoga Festival if you want to check that out, as well as some of the other festivals that she mentions on the podcast. If you want to be the first to know about new episodes and blog posts, sign up for the newsletter, and that's just on the website, www.mbomyoga.com/newsletter. And you can join the community on Facebook at www.facebook.com/mastering the business of yoga. I've got a lot of really exciting interviews coming up for the rest of the month and the months following. So definitely stay in touch. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com. As always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.